In this video, I'll show you how to make the ultimate remote contribution setup using the Magewell Director Mini. We'll set up two cameras that feed SRT feeds of both independently back to a studio and send a return feed back into this device showing the multi-view or program output. Hi, I'm Aaron Parecki. The Magewell Director Mini is a neat little box with two HDMI ins and supports USB webcams and a bunch of other features. I've got another intro video to this on my channel, so I'll leave a link to that down below. But in this video, we're going to set this up to stream two SRT feeds independently back to a studio, which you could use, for example, to send this box to a remote presenter, put this box on the remote end, and get both feeds of, say, a camera and a computer, or a camera and an overhead camera, and get both those feeds independently back into your studio where you can mix your show using any video mixer that you might already be using. There's going to be a little bit of setup we do on this box, and we will need a couple of extra devices as well. And before we get going, I should mention this unit is on loan to me from Magewell's US distributor, mobilevideodevices.com. So thanks a lot to them for sending this over for me to share with you on the channel. So before we set this up, I want to give a quick overview of what we'll be building. First, I want to go over a high level of what we're going to build and set up here. Over on the left is the gear that would be in the remote studio. We have two cameras. This could also be a camera and a computer, just two HDMI sources. Both are going to be plugged into the Director Mini. The Director Mini is going to have a monitor out over the USB-C port, which you can use as a screen mirroring. Monitor out so that the person in that studio can see a large version of whatever's on the screen there. The Magewell Director Mini is also connected to the internet. Now I've got the internet connection represented here as just a network switch, which is close to what's actually set up in my studio here. But you can imagine that this is just a placeholder for internet connection. If you can give it an Ethernet connection, that's going to be the best option, but it does have Wi-Fi built in as well. Over on your studio side, on the local studio side, let's say you're using an ATEM Mini or any other ATEM for your main video switcher in your studio. You might have a camera of your own or other sources, and you want to get two feeds from this remote studio brought into the ATEM Mini. To do that, we're going to need two devices. Any kind of RTMP or SRT encoder will work. I am a big fan of the Magewell ProConvert. I've been using it for years in the studio for all sorts of kinds of things. So for this, we'll use the Magewell ProConvert. I happen to have the SDI models because I have an ATEM with SDI ports, but they also make a version that has HDMI outputs as well. I'm gonna go ahead and add two HDMI cameras in here just for good measure. So we've got local cameras here and remote cameras coming in over this device. So this is the high level of what we're gonna build. Let's now dive into the Magewell Director Mini to actually set this up. So here I've got the Magewell Director Mini and I've got two cameras plugged into it. My main camera here and the side view here. To make those scenes, I actually went and made a new scene here. Just click the plus, tap on HDMI 1 and it defaults to full screen. And you can do the same thing for HDMI 2 as well. So with the two scenes created, we're ready to now configure the encoder. Now you can do this all on the touch screen of the device. All the settings are available here, but I actually find it to be a bit easier to do this on the computer. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually pull up the web interface of this device onto my computer, and we'll do it all there. So you're going to need to find your IP address of the Magewell on your local network. You can go to the network settings here, tap on Ethernet if you've plugged it into Ethernet, and it should show you the IP address here. I've actually already given mine a static IP in my router, which just makes things easier. So I always know the IP address it'll have. So I'm going to go to my computer and pull this up there, and we'll take a look at the web interface. So when you log into the Magewell Director Mini, you'll get a web interface that looks something like this. This first screen, the dashboard, will tell you which of your inputs are connected and give you status of things like CPU usage, and it'll tell you which network connections are enabled. In the latest firmware update, they actually have this new Produce tab, which is a really amazing view showing the status of all the inputs, and it even has this video feed streaming, which is very close to real time, as you can see. And you can even control the switcher from the web interface by just tapping on the inputs. But the tab we're interested in right now is this Encode tab. This is where you configure the two streaming encoders on the device. This device is somewhat unique in that there are actually two encoders built into the device, which means it can encode two completely separate things and send them to different locations. This is the default, just different versions of the program feed. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click Add under Encoder 1. This is the magic of this device. You are not limited to encoding only the program feed. You can actually change this to encode any of the HDMI or webcam inputs as well. Since we have two HDMI sources plugged in, I'm going to make encoder 1 encode HDMI 1. We will use H.264, 1080 resolution, frame rate and bitrate all look good. We'll go ahead and save that. And now I'm going to go ahead and scroll down here and actually select it. We'll do the same now for encoder 2. We're going to go add a new encoder, which is going to encode HDMI 2. And leave all the defaults, save it, and then select it. What this means is that when I hit the stream button on the Director Mini, it's now going to stream two different things. It's going to stream a copy of whatever's on HDMI 1 and a copy of whatever's on HDMI 2, which means switching between angles has no effect on the streaming outputs anymore. So the next thing to do is actually set up the streaming, and that's in the Stream tab. This is where you would do things like configure streaming to YouTube or any platforms, or even NDI. But what we're going to do is we're going to use SRT to send SRT feeds to the Magewell ProConverts that are in the studio, which means I actually need to first set those up. This is the Magewell ProConvert that I have in my studio. This is, you give it a network connection and it's actually power over Ethernet, which is nice. And then you can configure the streaming decoding and it'll output the video feed over this SDI port. So I have two of these in the rack and they're already set up on my network and I already know the IP addresses. So I'm gonna go ahead and log into those. So now I've logged into the first ProConvert. You'll notice the dashboard looks similar. It's a similar web interface to the Director Mini. It's not a coincidence, these are both Magewell devices. To set up the decoder, I'm gonna go to the Source tab and I'm gonna click Add. This is where we can create a new SRT stream. I'll click this SRT option, we'll call it Director Mini. And this is going to be a listener. This is the key. This one's the listener and the Director Mini is the caller. So you don't need to give it an address because it's listening on all interfaces. And then we'll give it a port. We'll just use port 9000. We'll use the defaults for latency and buffer. Okay. And then we need to click the select button to make sure this is the active source. So now as soon as this receives an SRT feed, it should output that over the SDI port, which I can bring into the stream here. We'll do the same thing on the other device. Again, I'll go to the Source tab, zoom in a little bit, make a new feed here, MPEG over SRT, call it Director Mini. Again, this will be a listener, and this one will use port 9001. Click OK. And then make sure it's selected. So a quick note on port numbers and network routing. What I'm doing here is all on a local network. This would work on a LAN as well as if you had VPN access from the box into your studio. So everything I'm doing here is local IP addresses on the network. If you want to do this over the internet, things are going to get a little bit more complicated because you'll have to set up port forwarding from your router into the two ProConverts. Port forwarding is something that works completely differently on every network router, so I'm not going to show you an example of how to do it here because it wouldn't really be that helpful. But if you want this to work over the internet, you'll need to set up port forwarding from your router twice, one to each of the ProConverts from different ports. And then you could use the public IP address of your network as the destination in the Director Mini. So to keep things simple for now, I'm just going to do everything on local network and on a LAN, and I'm going to use the private IP addresses within the network. You could use a VPN, set up your Director Mini on a VPN remotely so that it has access to your local network in your studio. That I'll save for a different video because that's also pretty involved. There's a couple other different devices we could use to set that up, so I'll save that for a video or ask me on a live stream. So with that out of the way, we've got our two ProConverts set up and we're ready to now plug those addresses into the Director Mini. So let's go back over here to the Director Mini's web interface. Here, I'm going to set up an SRT caller. I'll click configure here and we'll set up which of the two encoders this SRT feed is actually using. So first we'll do encoder 1, and now we give it the IP address. So again, this will be the local IP address of my first ProConvert, which is this one, 10.11.70.76. And the port on that one is 9000. We don't have a stream ID or encryption or anything, so we'll just go ahead and click save. That's ready. Now we're going to add a new server and we're going to add a second SRT. This is going to be SRT2 and we're going to use encoder 2. And for this one, we'll give it the IP address of the other one. That's going to be 10.4.70.77. This one was port 9001. I could have used port 9000 for both of them. I don't know why I did that. I'm going to go ahead and click save. Oops. We need a default latency. This one we said it was 125. So now that this is all set up, we've got a way to send two video feeds into the two local ProConverts in the studio, which means I could now take this box and actually ship it out to somebody. And as long as that has VPN access to my network, they would be able to hit the stream button on there and the feeds would pop up in my studio. But because this is a web interface, I can also go connect to that device remotely and click connect. This is probably also a good time to mention that Magewell does have a cloud management software. It's a different subscription service, but it gives you cloud access to all of your Magewell devices. I don't actually have that because I just use the IP addresses and VPNs myself, but it does make things a little bit easier. So on the web interface, I can click connect on both of these and it should start streaming the SRT feed to both encoders. So for this demo, I've actually got these two screens set up to show you the feeds from the ProConvert. This will show the feed from the first ProConvert. This will show the feed from the second. So as soon as I go over to the web interface here and click connect, we should see the feeds pop up on both screens. Now that those are in the studio here, I can actually mix them with any video sources that I might have in the studio. So if, for example, I'm the remote guest and I'm talking to a host back at my studio, we can make like a side-by-side layout in the ATEM using SuperSource. Let me go ahead and do that really quick. So this is a side-by-side layout created using the ATEM SuperSource with my background. On the left is the feed from the ProConvert, and on the right is the feed from the host at the main studio. So just imagine that I'm actually somewhere totally different, not sitting right behind the mannequin, and I'm the remote talent. So at this point, back in the studio, you could imagine switching between this layout, as well as showing this camera full screen, or even switching to the close-up camera from the side that's being fed remotely back into the studio. This is already a pretty good start, but back at the remote end, we actually don't want the remote person to only be seeing their own cameras. We probably want them to see the program feed so they know if they're on the air or they know if they're side by side next to somebody on screen. So for that, we need one more piece, which is a monitor at the remote end. You could use the Director Mini itself as the talent monitor because it is a screen. It's just a little bit small, and it would only really work if it's like right on top of the camera that's pretty close to the talent. But there is a USB-C port out, and you can actually connect an external monitor through a USB-C to HDMI display adapter. So I've got this little monitor off to the side, which represents the monitor that you would have at the remote talent. I'm going to plug this in over HDMI with a USB-C adapter, plug into the Director Mini. It'll actually ask me if I want to mirror the program feed or duplicate the screen or loop out one of the two HDMIs. For this, I actually do want to clean program display because I don't want the talent to see the whole interface of the Magewell. So we'll choose clean program feed, and on the monitor, you can see that it's just whatever is program selected. So as I'm switching through here, it's showing me whatever's the program feed. So now the trick is, how do I get the remote feed from the studio back into this device? And this is where we use another really cool feature of the Magewell Director Mini. Back in the Director Mini, remember how we can add HDMI and webcams? We can actually also add RTMP streams or SRT. For this, we're going to go ahead and do SRT. So for this, we're now going to need another SRT encoder at the studio end. I actually don't have the Magewell SRT encoder, so I'm just going to use a totally different brand one instead. I don't even remember what it is. The only trick is that the SRT encoder will have to be a listener, because this thing is going to want to go reach out to its IP address and make the connection. We can't actually have it feed in the opposite direction where the studio end pushes a feed into the Director Mini. So you'll need to find an SRT encoder that supports being a listener. I'll go load up the web interface for mine. So back in our gear diagram, what I've done is I've actually now added an SRT encoder. Now this isn't going to work well with the ATEM Mini original base model because you're going to want to use your HDMI output for your multi-view, but the ATEM Mini Extreme has 2 HDMI outs, or any of the Constellation lines have multiple aux outs. But the point here is that you take the output of the ATEM Mini and feed it into this SRT encoder and give that your network connection as well. So what we're going to want to do is have the Director Mini be able to reach through the internet and pull the SRT feed from this device. So let's go log into my SRT encoder and configure the feed. This is not the best web interface, which is why I'm not a huge fan of this encoder. But what I can do here is make sure that the SRT mode is set to listener, and I have to make sure I know what port it's on. So this is set up to be an SRT listener, and it's encoding whatever's coming in on the SDI port here. In my case, I believe it's the multi-view of the ATEM. So if I go to test this, I can actually pull it up in VLC. I should be able to just pull up this feed in VLC and we should see it. Okay, there we go. Here's the multi-view pulled up in VLC. This is actually just pulling the SRT feed. You can see the address right here. It's SRT, my IP address, port 9000/SDI. Now that I know I can get the feed from this encoder, we can actually go move on to the Director Mini. So back on the Director Mini, let's go ahead and punch this in. We're going to call this Studio. We'll give it the IP address of that encoder. Make sure we choose port 9000. And I believe this stream ID is SDI. Let's create that. And sure enough, we've got the same multi-view pulled up on the Magewell. Now I can just go ahead and save this full screen, and it's showing up as another option I can choose here, which now means I can go back and look at what's on the monitor here. And if I tap Studio on there, we now see the multi-view of the ATEM showing up through the Magewell Director Mini into the monitor. And again, this would work over the internet just as well. So now whatever's on your program feed of your ATEM is going to show up on the screen here. Right now it's this angle you're looking at, but if I go and change what's on the program feed, we can go to my SuperSource, for example. Now we're seeing the SuperSource of the computer and me there. If I go switch to the other super source, we've got the remote guest and the local talent on the screen on the program. And this is also what I'm seeing on the Magewell Director Mini on the table here. So let's do a quick recap of the setup here. I'll go back to this diagram to show you what's going on again. So over in your production studio, you may have one or more cameras or different sources that are local. You have 2 ProConverts to receive 2 SRT feeds. I forgot to actually connect this one. All your inputs, including the local cameras and ProConverts, connect to your video mixer, which could be an ATEM Mini or anything else that you're using. You need one output from that to go back into another encoder, an SRT encoder, which you give it also an internet connection. All of this goes over the internet or a VPN to the remote studio end, which has the Director Mini. The Director Mini has 2 HDMI cameras or other HDMI sources plugged in there. The USB-C out you can use for a monitor to see a large view of it in the room. And then this has an internet connection back to your studio. The trick on the Director Mini is that you set up encoder 1 to encode the HDMI port, not program. You set up encoder 2 to encode the HDMI 2, not the program. And then you set up 2 separate SRT streams that are SRT callers, one sending each of those encoders. This does mean you could actually use USB webcams instead of HDMI sources, because you can actually assign the encoder to a webcam instead of HDMI if you wanted. What we've done so far is just had a complete copy of the program feed from the studio showing up full screen on the monitor here. But imagine if this was actually a very large TV and you actually had a lot more real estate to work with. You may actually want the remote guests not only to see the program feed of what's on air, but also a local copy of their camera. And the good news is we can actually do that with the Director Mini. This is going to take a little bit of setup on the Director Mini, so let's go ahead and take a look. Remember when we added the SRT feed into this view here? Well, we don't actually have to have it be full screen. I'm going to go ahead and actually make a new view here. I'm going to click SRT, and I'm going to reuse the same SRT feed that's already being pulled in. This time, instead of it being full screen, we can actually just scale it down and leave room for something else. So I could, for example, put it off to the side here, and then I can go click this little plus over here and add a new video source to this scene. For example, my main camera. Assuming that we are going to crop the video feed, we'll go ahead and just make this bigger, add a crop here, save that, and then fit this around here, maybe move it down below so that this is on top. You can do all this layering of videos on the Magewell Director Mini, which is something that not a lot of other processors like this can actually do. Now we'll go ahead and save that. And now when I cut over to this one, on the monitor on the side here, this is now showing me a local copy of the video feed, as well as the remote feed that's on the remote stream. So now as the production studio goes and switches between different sources, like let's say the production studio goes to a full screen of the host, and then maybe they cut to a commercial or something, and then eventually they bring on the guest with the host. Now the remote guest can see what's on screen the entire time, as well as see a copy of their own camera as a confidence monitor. And that's the same thing that I see on the Magewell Director Mini that's on the table here. So again, this is something that not a lot of other video encoders can do, which is create these kind of completely flexible super source layouts of multiple sources. You can kind of do this with the ATEM, but not as flexible as this one. For example, I can actually even rotate these sources. This has nothing to do with this video. I'm just really impressed with this device and I wanted to show you it. Go ahead and actually just rotate the video, and you can just have video sources rotated in here, just like it's not a big deal. There's not a lot of live streaming devices that can actually do this. So this could actually be really handy if you have any content that you're doing in vertical mode. You could actually have your camera rotated itself and then rotate this back to see the video right side up. There's a lot of cool uses for the rotation feature in here, and it's frankly really impressive that it can all be done on this tiny little box. And again, I've done this all over SRT over my local network, but it will work just as well assuming you have the bandwidth to go over the internet. I would recommend setting up a VPN because it makes managing things like port forwarding just a lot simpler because you only have to do it once. And I don't yet have a video about setting up a VPN on this channel, although I've mentioned it many times during live streams. If I do end up making a video about this, I'll make sure to leave a link to it down below. I'll also leave a link to the Magewell Director Mini, as well as to the ProConvert models that I've recommended and used for this video down below as well. And once again, thanks to Magewell's US distributor Mobile Video Devices for sending this out on loan to take a look at on the channel and share with you these tips and tricks for using your Magewell Director Mini. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.